Have you ever imagined what it would feel like to stand aboard the largest passenger ship ever built in the early 20th century? A ship so enormous that people believed it could never sink. This was the RMS Titanic, a floating city that represented the peak of human engineering and luxury. The Titanic measured nearly 269 meters in length and over 28 meters in width. At the time, it was one of the largest moving structures ever created by human hands. One of Titanic's most iconic features was its 4 massive funnels. 3 carried smoke from the boilers, while the 4th improved ventilation and completed the ship's elegant appearance. From the outside, the Titanic looked less like a ship and more like a luxurious floating palace. Every deck was carefully designed to combine elegance with engineering excellence. As the Titanic began its voyage across the Atlantic, few could imagine that this magnificent vessel would one day become the most famous ship in history. But before tragedy struck, it stood as a symbol of innovation, confidence, and human ambition. Beneath Titanic's elegant appearance was a gigantic steel hull that carried the weight of the entire ship. Thousands of heavy steel plates were joined together with more than 3 million rivets, creating one of the strongest ship structures of its time. Inside the hull were 16 watertight compartments separated by massive steel bulkheads. Engineers believed that if several compartments flooded, the remaining sections would keep the ship afloat, making Titanic one of the safest ships ever designed. Above the hull were multiple passenger decks stretching almost the entire length of the ship. Wide promenades allowed passengers to walk, relax, and enjoy breathtaking views of the Atlantic Ocean. 20 lifeboats were mounted along the boat deck using large mechanical davits. Although advanced for their time, they were not enough to carry everyone on board. At the very front of the Titanic stood its powerful bow and enormous anchors. These massive steel anchors weighed several tons and were essential for securing the ship safely in harbors around the world. Beneath the stern of the Titanic were 3 enormous propellers. The 2 outer propellers were powered by massive reciprocating steam engines, while the center propeller was driven by a powerful steam turbine. Together, they pushed this 46,000-ton giant through the Atlantic Ocean with remarkable strength and efficiency. Just behind the center propeller stood the Titanic's enormous rudder. Controlled from the bridge, it directed the ship left or right, allowing this giant vessel to navigate the open ocean. High above the deck stood 2 towering masts carrying signal lights, lookout positions, and communication equipment. From the forward mast, lookouts continuously scanned the horizon for ships, storms, or dangerous icebergs. As darkness covered the Atlantic, thousands of electric lights illuminated the Titanic. Seen from a distance, the ship resembled a glowing city floating peacefully across the ocean. From the outside, the Titanic looked calm, elegant, and almost effortless. But hidden deep below the passenger decks, a different world was alive. Hundreds of engineers and firemen worked beside roaring boilers and powerful steam engines every minute of the journey. Now, let's descend into the heart of the Titanic. As we descend deep beneath the passenger decks, the atmosphere changes completely. The elegant silence above disappears, replaced by the thunder of massive machines. This is the engine room, the beating heart of the Titanic. Every movement of the ship depended on the powerful machinery operating here, 24 hours a day. Towering above the crew were 2 gigantic triple-expansion steam engines. Each piston moved with incredible force, converting high-pressure steam into mechanical power. Together, these engines drove the 2 outer propellers, pushing the Titanic across the Atlantic with remarkable efficiency. More than 300 engineers, mechanics, oilers, and firemen worked below deck to keep the ship moving. Their work was exhausting. Surrounded by heat, steam, and constant noise, they kept the engines running every minute of the voyage. The engines did not move the ship directly. Instead, their enormous rotating shafts carried power toward the stern, where the propellers transformed that power into forward motion through the water. But the engines could not produce power on their own. Their strength came from something even more important, the enormous boiler rooms, where hundreds of tons of coal were transformed into high-pressure steam. This was the true source of the Titanic's power. Behind the engine room were 6 massive boiler rooms containing 29 giant boilers. These towering machines generated the high-pressure steam that powered the Titanic day and night. The temperature inside often became unbearably hot, creating one of the most demanding workplaces on the entire ship. The boilers never worked alone. Hundreds of firemen labored tirelessly, shoveling coal into blazing furnaces every few minutes. Their exhausting work kept the steam pressure constant and the ship moving across the Atlantic without interruption. The Titanic carried thousands of tons of coal stored in large bunkers along the sides of the boiler rooms. Throughout the voyage, workers continuously transported coal from these storage areas to the furnaces, ensuring the boilers never ran out of fuel. As coal burned inside the furnaces, it heated enormous amounts of water inside the boilers. The water turned into high-pressure steam, which rushed through giant pipes toward the engine room. This invisible force was the true energy that powered the Titanic. Every second, thousands of liters of steam traveled through an intricate network of pipes before reaching the giant engines. Without this continuous flow, the propellers would stop turning, and the Titanic would become motionless in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Hidden deep inside the lower decks were the Titanic's enormous cargo holds. These massive storage spaces carried thousands of tons of luggage, valuable goods, food supplies, machinery, and personal belongings belonging to passengers traveling across the Atlantic. To feed thousands of passengers and crew during the voyage, the Titanic carried enormous quantities of food. Refrigerated storage rooms held fresh meat, fish, vegetables, fruit, milk, butter, and ice, carefully preserved for the journey. The letters RMS stood for Royal Mail Ship. Titanic carried thousands of letters and parcels across the Atlantic. Postal workers sorted mail throughout the voyage, ensuring that communication continued even in the middle of the ocean. Keeping food fresh for several days required powerful refrigeration systems. Large mechanical compressors continuously cooled the storage rooms, making long-distance ocean travel possible without food spoiling. Below the waterline, every system worked together to support life on board. As we leave the lower decks behind, we begin our journey upward into the living quarters, where thousands of passengers experienced life aboard the world's most luxurious ocean liner. Deep inside the lower decks, the third-class cabins were simple but surprisingly clean and comfortable. Most rooms contained bunk beds, wooden furniture, fresh bedding, and electric lights. For many immigrants, these cabins were far better than anything they had experienced before. 3 times a day, passengers gathered inside the third-class dining hall. Fresh bread, soup, meat, vegetables, and tea were served in a clean and organized environment, offering a much better experience than many expected. Life in third class was filled with hope. Children played together, adults talked about their dreams, and music often echoed through the corridors as the Titanic sailed steadily toward America. Long corridors connected the cabins to shared washrooms and gathering areas. These spaces allowed passengers from different countries to meet, talk, and build friendships during the voyage. Although third class lacked luxury, it offered safety, cleanliness, and hope. As we climb to the upper decks, a completely different world begins to appear, the luxurious first class, where elegance reached its highest level. As the elevator of our journey rises to the upper decks, the atmosphere changes completely. Rich oak wood, hand-carved decorations, crystal chandeliers, and luxurious carpets surround every hallway. This is the first-class section of the Titanic, designed to rival the finest hotels in the world. The finest first-class suites were more than cabins. They featured private bedrooms, luxurious sitting rooms, elegant furniture, electric heaters, and even private promenade decks. Wealthy passengers enjoyed a level of comfort rarely seen at sea. Every corridor reflected elegance. Beautiful wooden walls, soft lighting, polished brass railings, and thick carpets created an atmosphere of unmatched luxury throughout the ship. First-class passengers received exceptional service. Stewards were available day and night, helping guests with luggage, meals, room service, and every detail of their journey. But nothing represented the luxury of the Titanic more than one extraordinary masterpiece. At the center of the ship stood the world-famous Grand Staircase, a symbol of elegance that would become one of the most iconic interiors in history. One of the most important instruments on the bridge was the engine order telegraph. Instead of speaking directly to the engineers, officers moved the telegraph handle to commands like, slow ahead, half ahead, or full ahead. Seconds later, the same order appeared in the engine room, where engineers adjusted the engines immediately. To stay on course across the Atlantic, officers constantly monitored the ship's magnetic compass and navigation instruments. Every small correction helped keep the Titanic moving safely toward New York. Bridge officers never stopped watching the sea ahead. Day and night, they searched for ships, ice, fog, or any danger that could threaten the voyage. Constant observation was one of the most important duties on board. Every major decision on the Titanic came from Captain Edward Smith. He supervised the officers, approved changes in speed or course, and carried the ultimate responsibility for everyone on board. The bridge was more than just a control room. It was the brain of the Titanic. Every order, every course correction, and every important decision began here before traveling through the ship's vast engineering system. Just a few decks below the bridge was one of Titanic's most advanced technologies, the Marconi wireless room. From here, skilled radio operators sent and received wireless messages across hundreds of miles, connecting the ship with the outside world even in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Throughout the voyage, passengers sent personal telegrams to family and friends. At the same time, the operators received weather reports, navigation updates, and important messages from nearby ships. High above the deck, nearly 30 meters above the sea, stood the Crow's Nest, the highest observation point on the Titanic. From here, two lookout sailors constantly scanned the endless Atlantic, searching for ships, floating debris, and dangerous icebergs. Surprisingly, the lookouts had no binoculars that night. A missing key had locked the binocular cabinet before the voyage began. As a result, they relied only on their eyes to search the dark horizon. At 11:40 p.m., a dark shape suddenly emerged from the calm sea. As the ship moved closer, the outline became unmistakable. A massive iceberg stood directly in Titanic's path. Realizing the danger, Lookout Frederick Fleet immediately rang the warning bell 3 times and picked up the telephone to the bridge. His urgent words echoed through the ship, "Iceberg, right ahead." The warning reached the bridge instantly. Officers had only seconds to react. In those few critical moments, every decision would determine the fate of the largest ship ever built. The warning reached the bridge in an instant. First Officer William Murdoch reacted immediately. He ordered the helmsman to turn the ship hard to port while simultaneously signaling the engine room to stop the engines. Every second now mattered. The helmsman spun the massive steering wheel with all his strength. Deep below the decks, the steering machinery transferred the movement to the giant rudder at the stern. The Titanic slowly began to change direction. Far below, engineers received the emergency signal. Steam valves were closed, the engines slowed, and the mighty machinery that had powered the Titanic across the Atlantic began to lose momentum. The turn came too late. The starboard side of the Titanic scraped along the submerged ice. Instead of a violent crash, there was a long grinding sound as the iceberg tore open several sections of the ship's hull below the waterline. From the deck, the collision seemed minor. Many passengers barely noticed anything unusual. But beneath the surface, seawater was already rushing into multiple watertight compartments. The fate of the Titanic had already been sealed. Immediately after the collision, Titanic's chief designer, Thomas Andrews, hurried below deck to inspect the damage. As he moved through the lower compartments, he watched freezing seawater pouring into the ship. Within minutes, he realized the situation was far worse than anyone had imagined. The Titanic was designed with 16 watertight compartments. The ship could remain afloat if up to 4 compartments flooded. But the iceberg had damaged more than that, allowing water to spill from one compartment into the next. After completing his inspection, Thomas Andrews quietly reached a heartbreaking conclusion. The damage was beyond repair. The Titanic would not survive. He estimated the ship had only about 2 hours before it would sink beneath the Atlantic. Thomas Andrews reported directly to Captain Edward Smith. His message was simple but devastating. The ship could not be saved. The only remaining priority was to evacuate the passengers as quickly as possible. Within moments, the crew began preparing the lifeboats. Stewards knocked on cabin doors, asking passengers to put on life jackets and come up to the boat deck. Many still believed it was only a precaution, unaware of the tragedy that was unfolding. As the freezing Atlantic waters continued to fill the lower decks, the crew rushed to uncover the lifeboats. Ropes were checked, supplies were loaded, and officers took their positions. For the first time, the seriousness of the situation became visible to everyone on deck. Captain Smith ordered that women and children should board the lifeboats first. Crew members calmly guided families toward the boats. Some husbands kissed their wives goodbye, believing they would reunite again in New York. The first lifeboat slowly descended toward the icy Atlantic. Surprisingly, it carried far fewer people than it could have. Many passengers still believed the Titanic was too large to sink and chose to remain on board. As more lifeboats were prepared, confusion spread across the deck. Some passengers searched for family members, while others refused to leave the warmth of the ship. Time was running out, but many still did not understand the danger. With every passing minute, more seawater flooded the lower compartments. The bow of the Titanic slowly sank deeper into the Atlantic, and the ship developed a noticeable forward tilt. The disaster could no longer be hidden. By now, almost all of the lifeboats had been launched. Hundreds of people still remained on board, watching the final boats disappear into the darkness. The freezing Atlantic stretched endlessly around them, offering little hope of rescue in time. The bow continued sinking deeper beneath the surface. The angle of the ship became steeper with every passing minute. Loose furniture, equipment, and objects began sliding across the decks as gravity took over. As seawater reached the electrical systems, the ship's lights flickered one final time. Then, the Titanic was swallowed by darkness. Only the stars and the moon illuminated the giant ship in its final moments. The enormous stress on the hull became too great. The ship's structure failed, and the Titanic broke into two sections. The bow disappeared beneath the ocean first, while the stern briefly rose high above the water before following it into the depths. In the early hours of April 15, 1912, the Titanic disappeared beneath the Atlantic Ocean. The world's largest passenger ship was gone. What remained was silence, floating debris, and one of the greatest maritime tragedies in history. Hours after the Titanic disappeared beneath the Atlantic, the rescue ship RMS Carpathia arrived at the disaster site. Guided by the distress signals, her crew searched the freezing ocean for survivors, finding lifeboats scattered across the dark sea. Exhausted and freezing, the survivors climbed aboard Carpathia. They received warm blankets, hot drinks, and medical care. Many searched desperately for missing family members, hoping against hope to see familiar faces. For more than 70 years, the Titanic rested silently on the ocean floor. In 1985, an expedition finally discovered the wreck nearly 3,800 meters below the surface, revealing the ship once again to the world. The Titanic disaster transformed maritime safety forever. New international rules required enough lifeboats for everyone, continuous radio communication, and regular iceberg patrols across the North Atlantic. More than a century has passed, yet the Titanic continues to fascinate millions of people around the world. It remains a symbol of human ambition, engineering brilliance, and the importance of respecting the power of nature. The story of the Titanic will never truly sink, because history continues to remember it.